Okay. What I want to talk about today is basically some of the problems that arise. I wanted to kind of shed some light on academia and leftists in academia and some of these activist professors, and why they're so hard to deal with, and maybe what I've really been thinking about a lot recently and for some time now is the sort of proliferation of mental disorders throughout maybe Western society in general. If you've ever seen Calhoun's mouse Utopia experiments, right? These are experiments where they put a bunch of mice together, gave them all the conditions to sort of free them up from any of the sort of pressures of normal mouse living, so they have all the food they want. They're safe from predators, all the food and water, a lot of space. They're given X amount of space, and to see what happens. It was originally done to study the effects of overpopulation, and what it turns out to. And I might do a sort of series on this, but the mice and rats that he experimented on just become gradually and increasingly socially inept, right? Deviant in such a way that the mouse society no longer functions, and all these aberrant behaviors begin to manifest. And as the sort of social contact with other mice that are also sort of even increases, it just breaks down to the point where the whole society dies. And that's kind of, I don't want to get into it too much right now, but it's worth checking out and see what you think. Maybe I'll put a link to it down below. But one of the things I definitely have noticed in academia is this growth of what I would consider mild to severe mental disorders, particularly amongst the more activist academics and professors. And if you know, I'll be specifically referring to things that are really evidence of cluster B personality disorders, which are sort of borderline personalities, sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissists, histrionic personality. These kind of behaviors and personality disorders, I really feel are increasingly prevalent in these people. And this is part of what makes them so hard to deal with, and why people, when you look at them and you see these sort of, what strikes you as these insane behaviors, they really are aberrant. And these people sort of flood to academia. To give you an example, I'll list a few examples, just things that I've noticed that I kind of jotted down now. But one of the things sort of common to cluster B personality disorders is a tendency to be highly manipulative and deceitful, right? They can lie shamelessly. They're very, very manipulative. They're very cunning in their use of emotionality, right? It's almost pure pathos, what they do. Anytime they're speaking, they're manipulating through the use of emotion, and they do so fairly consciously. And this is just one example. If you've ever heard Andrea Dworkin, right? And I'll put a video of her. Maybe I'll add it right now, actually.
We are told in the society that we live in almost as the golden rule. The golden rule in the United States is that we have free speech. The First Amendment was written by slave owners and by men who owned white women as chattel. Women were property. And the First Amendment does not grant you a right to freedom of speech. That is not what it does. It says that once you have spoken, the government shouldn't punish you for it. But suppose you can't speak because the conditions of your oppression are such that you can't speak. This country gives us lies and platitudes and tells us that we can say whatever we want to say. Well, we can, because we can't get it heard, and some of us can't say it because we have been hurt too bad. We have been hurt. Now, what does it mean if 1 out of every 3 female children is sexually abused before she becomes an adult? She's supposed to jump out of the womb and start talking because she's only got a certain amount of time left? And if she doesn't make use of that time, the man who rapes her, who robs her of her sense of worth, of her sense of her own brilliance and beauty as a human being, what does it mean that in this society it is his rights that matter and no injury to her matters at all? What does it mean, and how the hell do we change it? We have a right to decide whether we want to use law or whether we want to use our bare hands. If you know what it is that needs to be torn down, tear it down. This is not fiction, this is real. Freedom of speech for women begins with an integrity of the body that is true and real and honest and absolute. There are no exceptions. There are no exceptions for men who are privileged to invade, and there are no exceptions for women, which is to say, oh yes, you mustn't do it to that woman, but do you see her over there? Yeah, it's okay, do it to her. Nobody will miss her. We miss her. We want her back.
Okay, so if you notice the emotionality of that speech, right? The over dramatization, the sort of pure appeal. If you really try to follow her thoughts and where she's bouncing around, it's, you know, if you go back and listen to it, you'll be like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. Right? She's talking about free speech, and then suddenly she's talking about how kids are abused and they can't speak. That's not really what free speech is about. Even in the terms that she seeks to redefine it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, and it never will. Right? This is not an appeal to reason. This is an appeal to emotionality, and this is extremely common, and it's highly manipulative. Right? You can see there's a sense of grandeur about her. Right? She's sort of almost like she's acting, like she's playing a part, and what it's supposed to seem is like she's so passionate. Right? But this is not the way normal people talk and give speeches. You should know. I mean, that's not a surprise, right? If you talk to people like that in normal life, that it's obviously a performance. Nobody would talk to you like that normally. And you have to understand this is usually intentional, right? And or maybe subconsciously. Sometimes it's outright manipulation. But the use of emotionality is going to be very, very big with these people. Now, the other thing another thing that you might notice, or that I've noticed in my time in academia, is people that are easily offended. Right? This is sort of very characteristic of narcissists, particularly. What happens is that they have a very fragile ego, but a very grandiose sense of self, and so part of them being offended is really you're disagreeing with them, right? Anytime you disagree with them, they're not seeing this as a difference in opinion. They're viewing this as a direct emotional attack, right? And this is, again, a sign of a personality disorder. They don't have the emotional maturity to sort of differentiate between what's just a difference of opinion and what's a direct attack on their person, right? So you say, well, I disagree with that. But what they hear is, you're stupid, right? they take that as a personal attack, and this is often what causes them to react emotionally, right? They are emotionally stunted. And a lot of times, because you'll notice, or I've noticed, that they have typically experienced trauma in their lives, which is, again, this is not their fault, but it does manifest later in life and throughout their life. You can get, Andrea Dworkin, who we just said was, molested as a kid. Another good example is like Gloria Steinem. Gloria Steinem, if you look at her history, so her mother was basically in and out of mental hospitals, right? And eventually her dad left them, and her mother, there was some issue with custody or whatever, but her mother, Gloria Steinem was raised by a fucking crazy person. And of course she's going to grow up with all sorts of crazy ideas. I've met people, I can say that I've had students that get offended and will later confess that they had a very traumatic childhood, which, is not their fault, and they don't deserve to be hated for it, but you have to kind of acknowledge that they're not normal and healthy. And when they grow up to be academics, they grab onto these ideas very, very, very passionately. They very much internalize, and it forms a part of their self. Now, another thing I've noticed is that leftist academics, and it's not all leftist academics, let me just make that clear, but it's these sort of particular social justice warrior types, that they also engage in high levels of nepotism. This is how they take over departments, is that they form these little cohorts, and they sort of act as a group to oppose anything that they don't agree with. And really, it can be anything, right? If it's not what they want, it has to be opposed. And they will be extremely nepotistic and supportive of getting people that agree with them. So once you get, one or two in your department, they're going to come together and push to hire more people just like them, right? And they will be very vocal about it, and they'll have all sorts of reasons. And gradually, they just sort of take over a department, right? Because if you try to hire, let's just say it's just a white professor, they will bitch and complain that it's not diverse, and this school has a lot of minorities, and you need to get more minority. And they will just so happen to hire people that don't, for example, history. You'll start to get people in history that don't actually have PhDs in history. They have it in, gender studies or African American studies or Mexican American studies. And it's not a coincidence that that's the people that they decide, oh, that's the person you need to hire, right? This is sort of nepotism. And they do, for the most part, look out for each other. The only exception is if someone breaks ranks, and then that person is cannibalized. But this is kind of how they engage in, or how they go about taking over departments. And, this is, I don't know if this is evidence of a mental disorder, but it's extreme to a point that normal people don't do, right? Now, as a consequence, they're going to almost always be a source of drama in whatever department or sort of work department, whether in academia or otherwise. Anyone they're in, they're going to be a source of drama. Like, I can give you an example of, so we had a couple feminist professors decide to set up a little stand in a courtyard where they were sort of blaring music. And another professor who was in a class close by and another woman, and she went to go ask them to turn down the music. And I guess they didn't like it, but the result of that was that those feminist professors, who happened to be black and Hispanic, went and filed a grievance against that other professor, accusing her of racism, actually not knowing that she herself was, I guess, ethnic. I was like, anyways, but it was deceitful, it was dishonest, but any kind of opposition even innocuous, just turn down the damn music, is twisted around it, and they attack that person, right? And the complaint was dismissed because it was ridiculous, but it makes these people, you don't want to deal with these people, right? They are aggressive, and they almost always are drama, and this is kind of how they take over, because it's easier to avoid these people than have to deal with them, right? I mean, it's just kind of how it is. I mean, it's not the right way to be, but we all do this, right? I mean, look at that video of Andrea Dworkin. I mean, honestly, if this lady wasn't an academic, she'd be pushing a damn shopping cart down the street. And what do you do with those crazy homeless people? You just ignore them. You try not to deal with them. And that's what you do in work and in academia. You just try not to deal with them. They're a huge pain in the ass because they're friggin' nuts. Anyhow, we're talking about Andrea Dworkin, you can see that air of self-righteousness, right? It's like they're on a crusade. They're not just working and not just educating. They are on a mission from God, right? Whatever thing they've substituted for God. And because of this sort of self-righteousness, which is also consequently another element of narcissism, they can always justify the ends, right? Any means that they happen to use, the lying, if you see it in the reporters, they're always lying. These sort of leftist journalists, they're always lying. They have no problem with lying because the ends always justify the means. They're right, and you're bad for not agreeing with them. And if they lie, that's okay. Doesn't matter. They're on a crusade. You understand? Now, this, like I said, this is, it's always your fault. They're never wrong. This is very much associated, or one of the, I guess, hallmarks of cluster B personality disorders, antisocial personality disorders. That air of self-righteousness. And consequently, the other sort of, one more telling sign is people like that you don't like to hang around, right? Not for long periods of time. And this is very true of these people. You'll notice that they're really socially maladapted. Like, they don't have a lot of friends, they don't have long-term relationships, certainly, right? This is also like a good sort of test for life, right? If you want to know if someone's nuts, do they have successful long-term relationships? And I don't mean in like marriage and girlfriends and boyfriends, although that's true too, but just having long-term friends. They can't maintain long-term relationships. Not friends, not romantic partners. They very rarely have friends, and if they do have friends, they haven't had them for very long because they have to swap them out constantly. Because for most of these personality disorders, they either lie and manipulate their friends to the point where you'll eventually catch on that this person is crazy, and they're highly unempathetic. Now, this is for the ones that actually do have personality disorders. Some people are still nuts and very empathetic. But if they have no friends, right, you can tell. And if you watch, some of the behavior, just watch some of these. Look at it. Do these seem like normal people that you want to hang out with? Anybody who's willing to lie and manipulate shamelessly, has a grandiose sense of self, right? You're not going to want to deal with that person for very long, especially if they're lying and manipulative, and they think they're justified in doing it. And you'll see, like, if you look at these, like, male feminist professors, oh my God, these dudes haven't been laid since God knows when, if ever. They can't find a woman. They probably don't have a lot of friends. They're social rejects. That's kind of what happens with these professors. Is not only are they sort of social rejects, but most students don't actually like them. But there is a subsect of people who exhibit a lot of this sort of same personality traits that will be attracted to these people. They're like Pied Pipers for the psychologically deficient, right? And it just kind of spreads, and that's how. And if you get a lot of people that have these personality traits and are willing to sort of be manipulated into complaining about everything. It's hard to fight it. I don't actually know what the solution is in academia. I can just tell you that there is a lot of social dysfunction amongst professors, and it's very hard to work with. You end up avoiding them as much as possible because they're friggin' nuts. And in work they have this, and it just in life, they, despite, like, if you look at one of the quotes from Andrea Dworkin from one of her books, she said, like, the worst immorality is to use one's strength to dominate or control. And that's exactly what they do. And that should tell you something, that they're so inconsistent and so hypocritical. And what makes it hard to deal with is that you are never dealing in good faith with these people. They're always being manipulative. They're willing to lie. They're just socially weird. How do you deal with those people? You don't. People just avoid them. But it is a manifestation that's getting worse and worse every year. And this is why I go back to that thing about behavioral sync. Because the numbers of these people coming out of society now, to some extent, it's more of a symptom of something else wrong in society that's manifesting these people. And they're going to gravitate towards things like professors or journalists, something where they have power. They're obsessed with power, right? They have this single-minded pursuit for control and dominance, right? Despite their claims that that's the worst thing to do, that's exactly what they do. The highly manipulative, highly nutty. And to some extent, I have to think, this is a part of society. These people are coming, where are they coming from? They're coming from Western society, which I think is beginning to manifest real examples of behavioral sync as sort of popularized by Dr. Calhoun in his mouse experiments. They're just non-functional individuals that are just, they're just fucked up. There's no other way. And if you put them in charge of a classroom where they can really embrace their grandiose sense of self and really take their manipulation to another level, well, that's not going to be good either. Now you're just exposing more and more people to crazy people, which can't be good, right? Maybe I will do a series on this. Anyhow, I think that's enough for now. I'll try to make more videos.